People say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is the First Time for Everything on the Go Indie Now network. I am your host, Juliet Rose. Tonight we are talking with Lily Luchesi. Did I say that right? Yes, Lily Luchesi. I want to make sure I remembered that right. Who is an author of over 20 books, and she writes everything from urban fantasy to a little bit of horror. Lily, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Juliet, thanks for having me on. If you're a frequent watcher of Go Indie Now, you may know me. If you don't, again, I write urban fantasy, horror, and mysteries. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I'm also the founder and owner of Partners in Crime Book Services, where I offer editing, formatting, and other services to authors. And you can find me on Facebook, on Amazon, on Instagram, and briefly on X. I'm a bit of a frequent poster on Instagram. So be warned.
Very cool. Yeah, I actually like Instagram too. I don't really use X, I guess now as much, but yeah, I definitely still really like Instagram. I like seeing people's pictures. You know, those are always really
Me too.
nice.
I'm a very visual person.
Me too. Yeah. And Anita says hi. Hi, Anita. Welcome to the show. So let's jump in and let's talk a little bit about where your journey began. I kind of saw Joe's post that maybe you have kind of a unique story, so I'd love to hear more about how your kind of book journey began.
My book journey, I like to say it began when I was born. My mother and grandmother had built, I should say, they didn't do it themselves, a 5-level floor-to-ceiling bookshelf with books for ages, birth through 5 years old. And they were avid readers, and I taught myself to read by the time I was 2. And then by the time I was 8 years old, I started writing short stories. I had a teacher who told me, hey, do you know you're really good at this? I'm like, oh, I am? And then I showed them to my mother, who encouraged me to publish if that was what I really wanted to do. And I started querying at age 16. I didn't get published until age 21, almost 22. It'll be 10 years next year, actually, which was Stakeout. But I started out blogging and proofreading as I waited for my journey to begin.
Very cool. So did you always know this is what you wanted to do? Like you were like, from that point, you were like, I'm going to grow up and be a writer? Or did you kind of play with it and do other things and then come back to it?
I had 2 paths. My mother had a deal with me. She said, if you want to work in a creative field like writing, because she also worked in a creative field, she did promotion for rock bands. And I also did that with her when I was a teenager. So she understood that working in a creative field is not always a sure thing. And she told me, if you don't make it by the time you're 25, where you're actually earning a living from doing something creative, then you have a backup and you'll be going back to school, to college. And my backup was going to be psychiatry, which thankfully, I'm here now.
So did you not end up going to school for psychiatry? You just kept going along with writing?
No, I just kept going along with writing. Whereas writing funds itself, in 2019, my mother and I began, actually right around the time I was 25, my mother and I began Partners in Crime Book Services. She used to be my business partner. And that was how I started earning a living in the creative field, doing editing and proofreading.
That's really cool. I love that you have that with your mother. Do you still partner with her for that?
My mother passed away 2 years ago. So it's just me now, but She didn't ask me for anything, but she made me promise one thing, and that was, you will never give up. She said, just like that. So I'm not. I'm keep going.
That's really cool. Yeah, I lost my mother at a young age too, and she was also a writer. She was a nurse, but she always wrote. But she did, I think she had this like potential to really write amazing sci-fi, but she just didn't. She kind of did some nursing articles, but she always would tell me stories, and that really kind of I've always carried forward with me. So even though she's passed on, it's like she's always still there, and I'm sure you feel the same way about your mother, that she's always kind of there in your ear.
She definitely is. I keep her around my neck, and I have her photo on my desk, and it's like, she's watching Obi. I'm like, I hope she's not watching everything I'm reading. That was her thing. For my other pen names, I do write explicit scenes, and that was her only thing. Was she said, I'm very uncomfortable reading that for my child. Anything else I would read of yours. And she was my biggest fan, my biggest supporter. She was also my PA for the whole time that I was writing.
That's really awesome. It's good to have those bonds. So tell me a little bit about your first book, which was Stakeout. So what type of book is that, and when did that come out?
That came out in May of 2015. So again, it'll be 10 years next May. And it came about when I wrote it in 2014. It's an urban fantasy novel. I had initially actually been querying other genres. I was initially doing contemporary romance, but urban fantasy and horror have always been my first love. So I was watching a crime show, and my brain went, what if the person that guy is chasing down an alley turned out not to be human? And that thought, that's, if you read Stakeout, that's the prologue. And that just spurned the whole series and my whole career.
Wow. So that is the beginning of a series. How many books are in that series?
There's 8 books in the series, in the main series. So initially, Stakeout was supposed to be a standalone, and it was 20,000 words longer than it actually is. And also the 2 main characters, Danny Mancini and Angelica Cross. Danny was supposed to be more of a main character than Angelica. And as I was writing, that switched, and Angelica just took over, which anyone who knows me in my writing process, she took over. Like, she took over everything. And it went from, okay, this is not a standalone. I have plot ideas for 2 more books. And then when that happened, it's like, oh, wait, 2 more. Okay, definitely 5. I'm done. And then it just kept going until 8, until, I like to say, I kept going until Angelica was satisfied. And there's also spin-off novels. There's Stakeout, Never Again, which is based off of a minor character who gets introduced in book 5, Sean, who was an absolute fan favorite. Like, everyone just adored him. And there's Holiday Hell, which is a horror Christmas novella, and Vampire Blood and Iron Bullets, which is a prequel from before Angelica and Danny get together.
Okay. So are all of your books series, or do you also have standalones?
The standalones are only the spinoffs. Everything so far has been series. They don't start out as series. I have another series called The Coven Princess. Well, the Coven series. And The Coven Princess was the first novel in it. That's YA urban fantasy. And it was just supposed to be that novel. And after I submitted it to my publisher at the time, both my publisher, my editor, my mother, and my ARC readers, all of those people were an influx of one question: when is book 2?
That's awesome.
I don't have a book 2, but it wound up being 5 books. I don't set out to write series. I don't plot things. Whatever just comes to my head is what gets written down.
Yeah, that's actually my next question was, are you a plotter or a pantser? Like, do you kind of let the story tell itself, or do you kind of know what you're going into?
I can say a little bit of both. I know vaguely what I'm getting into. When stories come to me, it starts as a vague idea and they just blossom. And it's like I'm watching it in my head as I'm typing. I have a movie up here as I go and type the story out. But even when I think I know what's happening, my characters have shocked me. The very last book in the Paranormal Detective series, when I had to find out like how the villain was going to come to be, because it's a very specific villain who needed to be summoned. I remember sitting there thinking to myself, oh God, I don't have to write this, do I? Because it was something that I didn't even want to do, but it's like the characters just, they took over.
They do. Yeah, they do. If you let them, they do. I think it makes a better story, though. I mean, I think I can always tell when I'm reading somebody's work whether or not they were kind of, forcing it along, or they allow the story to tell itself. And I really enjoy when the story tells itself. Even when I write, people say, well, did you know? I don't really ever know. I mean, there's definitely twists and stuff that just kind of come to me as it's happening. I'll sit down to write a chapter with no idea where I'm going. I know where I left off, and I know, kind of what I'm going to start with, but it tells itself. And I love telling stories like that. And I love reading stories like that, because again, I can always tell when a story is kind of like taking control.
I have clients who are plotters and clients who are pantsers, but one of my plotting clients, she'll send me messages like, you'll never guess what the characters did. I'm like, they did something that wasn't in your plot, didn't they?
Yeah.
And she'll send her, I love getting those kind of messages, because it's like, yeah, you can plot all you want. When those characters are just there, they take over. And that is what makes it most fun. When I was writing books 6 and 7 of the Paranormal Detective series, I actually didn't even remember some of what I wrote. And when I was going back to do my own self-edits before putting them into my editor, I'm like, oh, I wrote that happened?
Yeah.
That's great.
So you have kind of a unique kind of vision, in the sense that you do what I do. I also do editing and proofreading as a side business. But so tell me a little bit about that. Like, when you do that, like, first of all, what do you enjoy more? Do you enjoy writing more, or do you enjoy editing more? And then when you're editing your stuff or somebody else's, how do you kind of keep that writer's mind to take a step back? Like, how do you handle that in a I guess, a functional or analytical way?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, I don't know if I can pick, because it's like my characters demand things. And sometimes I don't enjoy writing because it's hard for me. What I'm writing is sometimes very difficult for me, but I love it at the same time. Like, it is, if I had to stop writing, I honestly think that I wouldn't even exist. Like, it's always been that big of a part of me, is making up stories. Since before I even knew how to write and spell, I was always making up stories. So, but when it comes to editing, I don't edit my own work. I just do self-edits before I turn it into an actual other editor.
Sure.
So, because I can't fully turn off my writer's mind when I'm self-editing. Now, when I'm editing other people's, because I'm a lifelong reader before I wrote, I just know what a reader will want to see. I look at it through an editor's mind, and then I do another go through with the plot, looking at it with the reader's mind. Like, what are they going to like? What are they going to dislike? What might they say to this? And my clients will see it in comments where it's like, I like this, but readers might say, and I'm listing, a couple of different like pros and cons, because different readers are not going to like everything. And so that's what I have to do as an editor, is let them know, okay, this is great, but, and let them decide as the writer what they want to do with certain parts of content.
That makes sense. I was going to share this. So author Daryl J. Boss said, it's true, characters will never behave no matter how hard you try to get them to. And I think it's good that they don't. I mean, honestly, like, I'll go into a story with an idea of a character and who they're going to be, and they tell me something completely different, and they were right. I was wrong, they were right, I listened. So I think it's really important to let your characters define their own voice. No matter what you think they're going to be, they're going to tell you otherwise.
Yeah, Danny was originally had a different name too. He was originally David. And he's like, I don't like that. So I started, I realized he was saying that as I'm typing it. And I'm like, I kept typing Danny instead of David. I'm like, okay, I guess that's his name. Same with Angelica. I actually didn't come up with her name, Angelica Cross. It just hit me. That's her name. I came up with her first name. And this is something that a lot of authors like to say, we'll pretend that we planned it all along. Angelica's name actually ties into the plot in the 8th book. And I did not plan that, because I never planned on an 8th book. I never even planned on a 2nd. But like, so many things that I wrote in the first couple of books that played out. If you read, I like to say it's in trilogies. It's 1 through 3, 4 and 5. They're their own. And then the third part in the trilogy is 6, 7, 8. And they're each. So if you read the first 3, there's things that you're going to notice that happen and form and shape book 8. But I never planned on any of it. It all came that way from the characters.
That's really cool. Do you ever get anybody that's like, I want you to write more in this series? Like, they kind of hound you to continue it on?
They understand the series ended, but I do have a couple of longtime readers who are like, is Angelica coming back? But a lot of them have been, I want to say satiated, but they're enjoying the Paige Papillon Paranormal Mysteries, which 3 out of 5 books have been released so far. And those are cozy paranormal mysteries, but they're set in the same world as Stakeout, as the paranormal detective
That's
series.
cool.
So even though they're a lot softer, like there's no curse words, the violence is mostly off screen. I very much enjoy writing violent and torture scenes.
Yeah.
I had to get those out of these. But a lot of readers who loved Angelica now love Paige's mentor, Vera. So I'm like, okay, you guys understand that I can't really write. Angelica doesn't have a story anymore. Her
Right.
story pretty much ended. And if you read book 8, you understand why her story ended. But at the same time, I can still use her world, which I'm having a lot of fun with.
That's really cool. And then Anita said, happy accidents in writing are the best. I agree. I think that, people think of writers as being so like, we sit down, I'm going to write this story. But so much of us is we're along for the ride as well, just like the reader is. And that's the best, I think, to be in that situation. Now, you mentioned something that I really related to, which is you said you have a movie playing in your head. And that's totally me. Like when I'm doing it, people say, I'm really not as much a writer as I am a transcriber. I'm transcribing the movie into words.
I've used that exact phrase. I'm transcribing their actions. Yes.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. So when you said that, I was like, oh, that's really cool. So tell me a little bit about that process for you. So like when an idea comes to you, does it immediately kind of start playing out in a movie, or do you have kind of like small ideas and then as you start to write it, it starts to play like out in a movie for you?
It depends on the books. Like with Stakeout, it started immediately like a movie. I think it also helped that I was watching something at the time, but then everything else, book 3, Life Sentence, there's the final battle scene that played out before anything else in the book in my head. So I write out of order. I write as the scenes come to me, and then I Frankenstein them together at the end. And that was one of the most vivid movie scenes that I've ever had with any of my books. It was, and sometimes, I'll just have scenes that are written down. I have a file full of them because they pop to my head that way. And I just save them like, okay, you're going to have a book, but you're not talking to me right now. So I'll just save what you've told me. But yeah, for the most part, they come pretty fully formed. I think the only ones that don't come fully formed are my pen name, S.L. Sinclair. All of my books for that didn't come as movies until this trilogy that I have planned for next year, which is going to be my first monster romances. And I'm going to have an official announcement for that soon.
And then we have it's why you're two of my favorite authors. Thank you. I see so vividly when I read your stuff, both of you. I think you definitely, when you're reading someone's work, you definitely can see if that movie's playing in their head, because you're seeing the movie as well. So let's talk a little bit about your writing process. So like for me, I have that. So where it starts for me is I start with scattered, like that scenes. I have a scene that I really just want to write. And then usually it builds out from that scene. So then over time, I'll let it kind of marinate. I'll send myself little notes. What is your writing process like leading up to writing, say, starting your books?
Mine's actually very similar. I've gotten lucky that a lot of the scenes that pop to my head are opening scenes. But like I have another book that I'm going to be releasing as S.L. Sinclair, which is a mafia romance. I don't have that for pre-order yet or anything. But I have 2 scenes that came to me like a movie, like completely a movie. And those 2 scenes are just saved. They're there. I even have a cover for this book because it was that vivid in my head. Yeah. But they're just sitting there and waiting. So that's my process basically is what character is giving me those scenes the most right now? Who's talking to me? Who's up here and who's like, okay, you pay attention to me now. And so whatever that process is, I'll take whatever scenes I write and either connect them, or the rare things like with Stakeout, I actually wrote it linear. It was prologue, epilogue, straight through. Even when I did the rewrites, it was still straight through. So I think it does depend per book what happens. But I do have, files full of scenes, emails full of notes.
Yeah. I would say someone actually looked at my emails to myself. They think I was insane because they're just so random.
Absolutely. And my notes file in my phone has so many random. I went to Toronto for the Ignite Your Soul author event last month. And while we were walking through one of the towns during a guided tour, I had my phone out the whole time. And I'm sure people were probably like, oh, this is just, some girl on her phone. It's like, no, I'm making notes. I have characters talking to me. Who owns this building? Who owns that building? Who died there? Like, no, notes are being taken.
All the time. Yeah, all the time.
But the
Like I'll
only
be driving. Sometimes I'm like, I got to pull over for a second just to send myself this message really quick.
I've done that in the middle of the grocery store. I really
Yeah.
have. But the one thing that I need before I write, and I don't know why I need it, I always need a blurb. My blurb is always written first. I'll
Oh,
get the first
interesting.
scene and then the blurb.
So yeah, the blurb is always the last thing for me because it's like the hardest. I don't know why. It's the hardest thing for me to write because it's like I've written the book and I'm like, now to write a blurb. I'm like,
I love blurbs. I do blurb writing for clients too. I
well,
just
good. I may reach out to you next and like, I need a blurb.
sounds good.
It's always the part. I can write a blurb for somebody else, like when I do that. But like for me, for some reason, it's like my brain just tapped out. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say.
That's more normal. But me actually enjoying writing my own blurbs apparently is very rare. I don't think I've found anyone else who likes them.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody say that. So yeah, I think you're pretty unique. So let's talk about kind of like that. What are some challenges that you come across in the process, whether it's the writing process or the editing process? What are your biggest challenges, you think?
Because I used to write very rapidly, I would do a lot of rapid releases. This was before I was doing editing as well. One of my biggest challenges is making sure everything is very unique. You don't want to use the same phrases too much across all books. You don't want to use the same torture methods. You want to make sure if you're writing a mystery, you have a plot twist, that you leave enough clues, but not to where people are going to guess everything. And those are one of the things, because I write with the movie in my head, sometimes I'm not paying attention to those. So those are the things I have to go back and go through and be like, okay, did I do this right? Is everyone going to understand what happened from the beginning to the end? Did I not spoil it? Because sometimes I actually have spoiled my own endings. I don't have to go and delete a scene like, oh, that doesn't work.
Yeah, totally. And say with editing. So when you're editing yourself, not your work, because obviously you use an editor, but you're editing somebody else's work. What do you see are some of the bigger challenges in that process flow?
I think it depends on the client. One of the biggest challenges for me is making sure, because they're not my characters, I don't know them, I don't know their development. Again, this is me taking myself out of the writer and also out of the editor and putting on that reader hat for a moment, because I have to make sure, is everything flowing properly? It's almost the same issue, but I don't have the insider knowledge. I don't know these characters. I don't know what's happening. So I have the same issues, but with less knowledge. So that's why I go through the books multiple times when I'm editing to make sure, is this all cohesive? Is this all, are you showing and not telling? Are you giving your character proper growth and proper development? It's just, it's a lot of the things that I don't have to think about with my characters because I know they're developing. I know it because they're telling me. With someone else's characters, they're not talking to me. So I have to pull them out of these pages and make sure that, my client's book baby is saying exactly what they want it to say.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally relate to that. So going back to your first book, and if you could go back now, so you're you now, so you're an editor for you back then, what advice would you give your younger self, or what would you want to do differently now that you know what you know?
I have two pieces of advice that I would give myself on an editing way. Stop using the word just and stop with the exclamation points. Not everything needs them. In fact, nearly nothing needs an exclamation point except for Angelica's yelling at someone.
Yeah, that's very valid. Yeah, because sometimes I don't use a lot, but every once in a while I'll put one in, and then when I'm going back to kind of read through it, I'm like, why did I put that there? It's totally unnecessary. Take that out. So yeah, I almost never. Same thing if someone's like verbally using dialogue where they're yelling, I'll use it. Other than that,
Right.
yeah, it's not necessary. Right. And yes, just if you read the sentence without the word, it most often doesn't need it. So yeah, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah. Younger me had that as an issue. I hate saying this because it seems like I have a big ego, but I don't. I'm probably the biggest self-doubter that there is in the world. But one thing that I know I'm good at is I know I'm fucking amazing at writing. Like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I love. So style-wise, there isn't too much that I would tell younger me. It's technical. The things that I learned before I started editing, I would like to tell younger me.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of something I was going to ask initially, but I changed it, which was, what did you learn from editing other people's work? But I think that's kind of where the question came from, was like, we do tend to, when we start editing, and like when I'm editing people's stuff, I'll say, do I do that? I need to like, because it's something I catch in somebody else's work with me I don't catch initially. So then I'll look back at mine with a different eye, which is good because I think we're constantly fine tuning the technical, which is I think the hardest part. I would say writing is the easy part because you can just pour it out. But like then having to go back and do the technical side of it, make sure it flows, make sure you didn't like that. Like
yes,
the name's all the same.
I have clients who come to me and they're like, "Why do I even have to go through this part?" I'm like, because that's part of the process. You got to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much every writer hates it. I hate it. I hate doing my own. But yeah, the couple of clients who will write me and they'll be like, I just don't like doing it. I know you don't. We all do. We all hate it.
Yeah. I get people that say that too. They're just like, well, I like this part, but I don't like that part. I said, but you have to understand it's like the whole cake. You know, you have to do all steps to make the cake. You can't just mix the batter. You know, you have to do everything. And you get to the point where I think you start to enjoy it. At least I do now that I know it's part of the process. Now that I've accepted it and I do it, then I'm like, that's just part of the process. I don't cringe anymore when it's time to do something I really didn't enjoy before.
To go on your food analogy, the writing process is like making one of my Nona's recipes where I can just go to the stove and there's no measurements and I'm putting it in. I can tell just by the smell alone, it's going to be awesome. And then doing the editing, doing the refining, that's like baking. You have every little step, like you have to use even the tiniest little knife just to be sure everything is exact or it's not going to be good.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I was a chef at one point in my life, and we would make the food and then we would give it to the expediter and they would clean up the plate. You know, they'd take the napkin and clean it and add the garnish. And that was so important because what we did tasted good and it was good, but the presentation, we didn't have time. So they did the presentation. They'd clean it up, make it look really good. And then they brought it to the patron who was happy because they got this beautiful plate of delicious food. We were the delicious part. They were the beautiful part. And I think that's really important to remember when we're creating something, that it's more than just being like, what is they say, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, they're going to. So get over that. It's going to happen. Yeah.
They're always going to. And that's why, even if I don't do, because I do covers, I also buy covers depending on what book it is. But that's something that I've told a lot of clients who are just starting out. What your cover looks like matters. It doesn't matter how great that inside is. That cover's got a hook. Period.
It has to, because that's what they're seeing. I mean, we see things initially with our eyes. You're not yelling the words at them when they're walking by. They're seeing the cover. And, I'll do a display when I'm doing an event and somebody will walk by and then I'll see them stop and turn and look at the cover. It matters. Presentation matters. So we kind of like talking about with being a chef, like you have to make sure all the pieces come together. You might be a brilliant writer. And I've been a judge for a contest. And one thing that got me was there were some of the books I didn't even want to pick up to read to judge, simply because the covers were so bad, but they were actually really good books. Like, cause I had to read them all. So I read them and I was like, wow, they just need a new cover artist. They need someone to just do that, because the book itself was amazing, but they're not going to know that.
The internet now, and reading digitally, a lot of people are just looking at the covers. And, if you have a subtitle, if you list a couple of the tropes, that helps. But most people are just looking at a list on Amazon. They're not going and even checking your blurb. So your cover has to speak what's inside your book.
It does. Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about everybody's least favorite subject usually, which is reviews. So I'm sure all authors or most authors have negative reviews. So dealing with negative reviews is part of writing, and it isn't a reflection of you as a writer. How do you deal with negative reviews? Do you take them to heart? Do you change what you do? Do you just see it as part of the way it is? You can't please everybody. What is your kind of feeling on that?
Am I allowed to curse?
Absolutely. Please do.
My absolute favorite way to respond to a question about reviews is to quote Stephen King: opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one and somebody stinks.
Yeah.
I don't let bad reviews bother me very much. I've only had 2 that ever bothered me, and I bring them up often. It's Paranormal Detective series, book 4. And one of the reviews was, "You never tell us where Angelica went. So how are we, I'm lost." I did tell you, it's in the prologue. Apparently you didn't read it.
Some people don't read prologues, which blows my mind. I'm like, that's part of the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, the second one was, "There are too many gay people in this book to make it believable." Like, oh, you haven't seen my friend group, have you?
I'm like, how many is too many? Like, I don't get that.
It's 4. It's 4.
That's not too many.
No. It's funny, and that's still not too many, because why is a book with 20 straight people, realistic?
Exactly. Yeah.
They just the only 2 that ever annoyed me.
showing their comfort level. Yeah, I totally agree. I think with reviews, it's something that, if somebody has maybe a technical point, like, oh, I got to this point and it skipped, or they didn't follow back up on something, sure, that's something worth looking at and saying, is that true? But I agree, like, you have to just move on, because again, we don't please everybody all the time. Not everybody likes everything they're going to read, and somebody might not even like all of a story. I mean, I've read books where I've like just loved it, got to like 2/3 in, and like then I hated a couple chapters, and then I liked the ending, or vice versa. I loved it all the way into the last chapter, and I was like, ugh. But it didn't mean that the writing wasn't good, and it didn't mean the book wasn't good. It just didn't speak to me at those points.
Right. When I was doing book blogging, I was a reviewer. I was an ARC reader. I was on a bunch of teams for both publishers and indie authors. And there were a lot of times where the writing was bad. And so I had to give a 3-star or less, and I had to explain to them why, which incidentally, that is actually how I started proofreading, because one of the authors was like, you caught all of these that the person I hired didn't. Can I hire you? Please. Yes. Let's start.
That's valid.
If I just like the story, if it just wasn't for me, I'm still going to give it a 4, and I'm going to explain it wasn't for me, but here's some great points of it, where if this is your thing, you're probably going to give it a 5. And that's kind of how reviews should go. But most people just, well, I hated it and I thought it was a bad plot, so I'm going to give it a 1 star. That's your prerogative, but you got to think on the bigger picture. Reviews are for other readers. A review that you write isn't for you. It isn't even for the author. It's for other readers to know what is in this book.
For sure. So we talked about where you began with your writing. So where are you going moving forward? So you finished the 1 series. So where are you now?
Well, I finished 2 series. I finished Paranormal Detective series, and I finished the Coven series, which I would love to go back to YA at some point. But as of right now, I don't have any characters in my head. So I'm releasing my very first collection of short horror and urban fantasy stories called Dark Delights on October 25th. Which I just found out is also apparently going to be Prime Day, a special Prime. So I'm like, sales are bad on that day, but oh well. I don't want to release it right before Halloween. So that's coming next. As Lily, I also do have the final 2 Paige Papillon books to get done. I stopped doing the series after Mom passed. I just couldn't handle it, and I'm still not totally back into it, but like book 5, I keep telling every time I go on here, and Joe knows, Maddie DeGraff read, she knows because they both read it. And I keep telling people, book 5, you are not going to believe book 5. Like the whole reason I wanted to write Paige's story was because of what was told to me is going to happen in book 5. And that's one of those scenes. I have to have the scene written. It's there. It's in its own file. I will open it up and read it and be like, I need to finish this book because it's very loud. It's very loud. The characters are very much wanting to have everything out into the open. So that's going to be part of my 2025. And since you asked, I told Joe in one of the comments I wasn't sure if I'd have time. I am going to have a very special 10th anniversary edition of Stakeout in May of next year. I'm going to be making official announcements and graphics and everything after the new year happens, but I have very, very big plans for the book, and I'm very excited, hopefully, to be reaching new readers and to please the older readers. So it's going to be very fun.
Very cool. Very cool. And just remind me, so you write under a couple names. So what are the names you write under?
I also write contemporary MF and MM romance, and FF as well. I haven't done too many of those as Samantha Calcott. I actually have, it goes from sweet to BDSM, depending on the range. And I have a sweet one releasing November 1st as part of the Gingerbread Kisses Sweet Romance holiday set. I do one of those every year. I start the sets and have, a group of us just do our homage to Hallmark. And then I also write very dark and taboo romance, both MF and reverse harem as S.L. Sinclair, which that's one of those. I say she is definitely a separate entity from me.
Okay.
She's someone like, read the trigger warnings before you open the books. But it allows me to let out a lot of the darker things that come into my head.
That's pretty cool. I was going to post this real quick. So go and eat out. That's so awesome. We love exclusives. I think he's referring to your Stakeout special.
Yes, of course. Awesome. I have only one person because I needed advice that I allowed. And you're welcome. The only place that I would share an announcement like that would be Go Indie Now. Like, absolutely.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, thank you. We do appreciate that. Okay, so let's kind of move forward a little bit here. So you write under 3 different pen names, correct? So your Lily name, that's your stakeout series.
Yes.
Your Samantha is your sweeter romance.
Sweeter and BDSM, but
Okay.
not dark.
And then your other one is
S.L. Sinclair, and that is dark and very taboo.
okay. Just like it's just where listeners could be like, okay, I like that, or yeah, I'm going to chase that down. So, do you find it hard? Like I write cross genre and mixed genre, so I write everything from contemporary suspense to horror, but I keep my same name. Do you find it hard to balance the 3 different names, or do you prefer it that way?
I prefer it that way, especially because I do have YA under this name. Whereas with my non-YA as Lily, like Stakeout, the worst part of it is the violence and cursing. I don't really have anything that you wouldn't see kind of on like the CW or like AMC, something like that. It's not very risque, but just in case a teenager or a kid were to come across it, I don't want to have the explicit sex because, like, I know it's not a big deal, but some parents don't want it. Some kids may not be ready for it at that time. Everyone grows up differently. So I wanted to make sure that I had everything separately. S.L. Sinclair, initially, she was only separate because the taboo element, there are people who dox us and reveal our personal information. They will curse you. They will threaten you if you write taboo romance because taboo is just, no, you shouldn't be doing that. That's disgusting. None of us are actually doing this stuff in real life.
Right.
It's just sometimes our brains go to a very dark place and it comes out that way. But yeah, that's the reason that I even made a separate one. And I initially kept it where no one knew that I wrote it, just in case people wanted to try and, screw me over.
Yeah, no, it's a real fear. I mean, I've seen it. I'm part of horror communities too, and I've seen horror authors that have gotten the same thing, just completely exposed and lost their jobs and things like that. So I think that's valid. I think it shouldn't be the case. I'm also a librarian, so I definitely see the sort of like people not being happy that certain books exist at all.
Yeah. You're dealing with a lot there as a librarian, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I understand that makes total sense. So here's the question though. So when you do this, so now you have the 3 different names. Do you have a website? Do you now let people know all 3 different names, or how do you handle that?
I have 3 separate newsletters right now. I only have a website currently for Lily. With Samantha, that's always been newsletter only, and she works the best that way. With S.L. Sinclair, I'm actually currently building my website because I realized that she does actually need one because people, instead of just going to the newsletter, people are straight up Googling her.
Right.
So it's like, okay, I need a website for you. Whereas Samantha does not require one, where she, like I said, I sell through the newsletter and through Amazon social media. But yeah, Lily's got one. I need to update that. But the most important thing is getting S.L. Sinclair's website up and running. But it's very time consuming. And right now I'm actually on deadline with the final draft of her next book, which is coming out at the end of this month.
So I know you have something this month, you have something October, and you have something November?
Yes.
You are busy. I think I'm busy. You are busy.
I like to stay busy. I've always been this way. My mother used to scold me, can you please slow down a little bit? It's like, no, I don't like to stop my brain. But what's releasing in October, I basically just have to promote it. It was already written. And also for Dark Delights coming in October under Lily, there are a couple of stories that were in anthologies about Angelica Cross. And so I think people are going to enjoy, if they haven't read those anthologies when they were published, they're going to enjoy reading some new but not new stories from her.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. And so just real quick, what is your website? What is the website you currently have?
lilyluchesi.wix.com/home. And you can get the spelling down here, wherever I'm pointing at.
Right. Yeah, you got it.
Still screws me up, and it's been so long. But mostly where I post all of my new releases is on Facebook, and I have a Facebook for each pen name for Lily Luchesi, Samantha Calcott, and S.L. Sinclair. I like the reach that I get so far from there. So even if you're not a website person, because if you're a social media person, just follow my pages and you will get every single update.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. It's interesting looking at social media versus websites. There was a time where websites were really necessary to show that you were doing this and you're professional. And I have them as well. I have one for myself and one for the publishing house. But honestly, most of my hits, most of my sales happen through social media, which I don't love. I'm not a social media person, but you have to, right? To a degree.
I also come through my newsletter. I've spent a lot of time building up my newsletter. Courtney Cannon, who does stuff at GoIndie now, I use her builders for all 3 of my pen names, and yeah, it's built me up a wonderful list where if you're signed up through there, and I don't have to comment the URL because there's numbers in it and my memory is bad. It doesn't let me do a short URL for it through Wix, but where you can get the newsletters, because I love doing those. I love it's just once a month. Here's everything. Here's what's up. You guys can have it. And yeah, that's where most of my sales come from, because I don't trust social media completely. And you'll see a lot of other people talking about that, where the algorithm is not on your side, even paying for it, it's not on your side.
Yeah.
So that's why I do the newsletter, because even a website can go down, but newsletter hosting typically is always going to stay up. That's something that you control fully.
True. Yeah. That's very good advice. So obviously you started out strong. You kind of hit the ground running. You've done really well over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. One of the topics I like to talk about, because I think it's important for people to recognize, is how failure teaches us, or how failure makes us better. So do you have a situation like that where you can look back and say, well, I tried that and it didn't work, but it taught me A, B? Do you have anything like that?
I do. My book, Never Again, it did very well with ARC readers and the people who are on my team. Publisher loved it. My mother absolutely adored it. Again, it was all of my ARC readers. Everyone wanted Sean's story, and he did have a story. And it was another one of those that played out like a movie for me, where I wrote 85,000 words in just a couple of weeks. It was just one of those stories.
Yeah.
And then I released it, and then I re-released it. And I don't even think I have made $20 off of that book. I have not earned back the editing that I put into it when I re-released it. I haven't earned back the money I spent on the stock photo. Nothing. Wow. It's a World War II through modern day urban fantasy horror. And the main character is a male siren who lived through these demons. There's this urban legend about how Nazis were using and summoning these demons in Hauska Castle. And I think Czech Republic. I'm very bad with locations. This is why I make notes about locations and nothing else.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I'm that's when everything started clicking for me. And I did so much research. Sean was talking to me so much. I put that character through so much, and nobody wants this book. It doesn't matter how I promote it, where I promote it, what cover it has. It just doesn't sell.
And what's the name of it again?
Never Again.
Never Again. So
yes.
Do you have a feeling or an idea of why it's not, or you think it's just not? Sometimes it's not time, it's not hitting its right time. You ever see a book that maybe didn't do so great, and then 50 years later someone discovers it, makes a movie out of it, blows up? Do you feel like maybe that's kind of what's going on with it? Or
I'm thinking so. I also think that it could even be the opposite. When I released it initially at the end of 2016, we were dealing here in America with an election that most of us were not happy with, and had a lot of World War II comparisons. And I'm thinking maybe releasing it then was people did not want that, as opposed to wanting to escape to it. I think maybe they didn't. Yeah. Re-releasing it, there really wasn't much of a pull or anything that I could use for it. So I think maybe you're right. Maybe at some point in the future, I hope that it will. Most people say, if you have a bad selling book, just take it down. That book is my baby. I love that book.
Yeah,
I adore it.
Agree.
I personally feel it's the best thing that I have ever written, and probably ever will write. It's just one of those where you just hit something as a writer, and it just strikes you a certain way. So I refuse to take it down. I am going to nurture that baby and leave him there until he finally grows up and gets some readers.
Yeah. So folks out there, Never Again, check it out. It does sound like a really good book. Sounds like actually something very similar to what type of stuff I read. I have actually a YA kind of suspense that gets into Nazis and demons too, because I thought it was important. But it's funny because I think the subject matter, those two words, either people are immediately drawn to it or they immediately pull away, maybe out of discomfort. They go, oh, I don't know if I could read that. I hear people say that they'll pick up my book, like, oh, I don't know, like Nazis and demons,
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that I wanted to do was, market it to the horror readers who would be interested in something like that. But it also could be that it's not, it's too graphic for urban fantasy readers, maybe not graphic enough for horror readers. I don't know, because it is very plot heavy. It's also very torture heavy. Like I said, I enjoy writing those scenes and I really enjoyed it. I actually had a couple of my readers wrote, they're like, we had to skip a couple of them because you've got maggots and eyeballs and you've got,
oh yeah.
like, yeah, no, it's fun. And they're like, no, it wasn't fun.
Interesting. So what genre would you say that book is? Like if you were going to have to.
It is a perfect cross between urban fantasy and horror, but I market it more as horror just because of the torture level.
Sure.
It might make some people uncomfortable.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. That actually sounds interesting to me. So, and I read a lot of horror. I don't usually do torture scenes. That's kind of the thing I tend to shy away from. But I'm always willing to, if the story's a good story, like I'm willing to kind of.
I like to say it's a good story. There's legends of how sirens were first talked about in the seas when a boat crashed in the Ottoman Empire. That's an urban legend. And I actually use that. And he is the reason. It's not a woman. It's him. He's the reason the boat crashed because he started singing and didn't realize what his powers would do.
Oh, that's really interesting. Very cool. Okay, so I'll share this real quick. So maggots and eyeballs would appeal to horror fans. I agree. Although there's levels of horror too. Like I write probably what's considered more like quiet horror, and then it goes all the way to extreme or splatterpunk type horror. So
yeah, I'm somewhere in the middle of psychological where I want the reader to feel that trepidation. There's a scene where he's going through a darkened sewer with only his cell phone light to try and find what his demon's hiding. And I want you to feel as grossed out as he is. I want you to hear the rep that he steps in. I want you to feel and hear that. I want to mess with your head a little bit. I want to take you in where he is. And I apply that throughout all of my books. I want you to feel that movie in your head, just like I have it.
Yeah, that's really good. There's different styles of writing. Some people are really character driven, some people are plot driven or description. Where would you put yourself in that? Or would you say you're just a good balance of everything?
I'm very character driven. I am the type of person, I believe the characters drive the plot. The characters drive the plot. They make you want to read more. I have read as a reader, thankfully I haven't come across this as an editor, but as a reader, I have read stories that have the most amazing plots, but the characters are dull as dishwater, and I just can't handle it. Very, very popular book series that I was told to read. It actually came out on my 12th birthday. And even at 12 years old, I'm being like, this character is so boring. I'd like to burn this book right now. And I told my mom, we were at the bookstore, because every birthday I'll go to the bookstore. And I handed her back the book. She's like, do you want me to pay for it? I'm like, you can put it back on the shelf. Thank you. If it's a dry character, I don't care how great the plot is. A dry character cannot move it forward. You must have a good character to move the plot. You have to have a good plot as well. But again, as I'm someone who's the characters come to me, the characters tell me what the plot is. So if your character is dry, the readers are just not going to relate. Even if your character is a major asshole, if you write that asshole well, the readers are going to want to read and find out what happens to them. Okay. Whether they want to see him succeed or die,
Exactly. Well, I always say, if someone's not invested in the character, why are they going to care about the story? They have to care about the character first to get invested, to then want to know or care what happens to him. Because, I have the same thing. I've read books where, it was a good story, but the character, I didn't care. So I really didn't care if they lived or died, which kind of took away any kind of maybe suspense that was in the story. Because I'm like, whatever, just kill them off. You
don't have that emotional connection. I think if you have a wide range of characters, even if they're all just minor characters, if they're in it enough, then your main character doesn't have to be as interesting, and everyone moves their plot along. I have read a couple of series that were like this. Again, another very popular series. Main character, he's kind of meh. I could probably slap him a few times because he's whiny. But every other character is so great and so diverse and so different, where it's like, okay, I still love this story because they're pushing this dishwater character along. And I think that only really works if you have a long series, though. You can't really do that in a standalone.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, it's interesting because sometimes people, they have their main character isn't the character you care about. It's some other character. And they kind of missed that, I think, in writing it, to like maybe put that character more in the forefront. So you have this character like, man, I'd like to know more about that character. You're like, I want to know what their motivations are. And I, as an editor, that is something I've come across where I'd say, hey, you kind of made your secondary character shine more than your main character. Do you want to maybe relook at that? Because to the point where the story, like every time the main character came in, I was like, yeah, move on. Like, I want to hear from the secondary character. Like, so just move on. So like developing those characters in a way, and you know, your main character can be unlikable. They just have to be, you have to be feel invested in them.
Yes. Yes. I have a couple of clients who they write interconnected series. And I remember putting a note in one of them, like, I really like her. You know, she's a new character. Can she? And she's like, yeah, she's already got her trilogy planned. I'm like, perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the main character was already likable, but like the best friend stood out so well. I'm like, I really like her. And she's like, yeah, already planned. I know.
Yeah, I definitely had that too in a book where I had like it's supposed to be a character that was gonna be on like 2 pages, and yet he just had such charisma that he ended up getting his own book eventually. You know, like because like that 2 pages, he just owned it. You know, and again, he told me, so he owned it. He got his own book. So yeah, I agree. I think character development is number one, because that is what drives everything else in the story. And then being open to saying, yes, this was my main character, but they're really not carrying the story. This other character is carrying the story. Let me reassess. So going back to first, we talked about how you first got started, where you're going now. When you first wanted to write, when you say you were a young person, you wanted to write, did you always think you wanted to write novels, or did you think about things like screenplays? Do you think about things like that? Or are you pretty much committed to just writing books?
I actually initially thought of wanting to do comic books and manga. Ooh, that was my initial thing, and write an anime. I absolutely adore anime. I still watch it. I still read manga. So that was my initial thing, or even do like something with DC Comics, because that was my main. I would love to write a comic book one day.
That's cool.
I would like to do a screenplay, but I would like to do an original screenplay. I wouldn't screenplay my own books. I would just write an original. I would like my books to also be adapted. I did get contacted by a few different production companies. Sadly, things fell through. But I was contacted for Stakeout, actually. And one of the things was, you know, you do have to let us have that script. I'm like, you know what? You can have that script. You just have to keep 2 things the same. Angelica has to look goth, and she has to stay plus size. You're not putting no skinny mini in there, because I wanted her to look a very particular way that at the time was not represented in fiction, basically at all. You know, 10 years ago, it's still harder to find, but easier now. But yeah, I would love to do a screenplay of my own. If it is screenplay, it would be horror. If I did a comic book, I'd love to do something really like quirky, superhero-y, like a cross between Umbrella Academy and Sailor Moon type of thing.
That's awesome. Yeah. You said 2 that I really like. So yeah. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, let's do a couple of the spins of the wheel. So let me share real quick. I'm going to pull this up. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So let's give a spin. Let's see where it lands. Ooh, I like this one. This is first celebrity crush.
I had 2. One that I don't remember, but who I still love, and that would be Kurt Cobain. And then my first major celebrity crush was Aaron Carter, the pop star.
Aaron Carter, yeah.
I adored him.
Very cool. I can't think of mine. That was too long ago. I was trying to remember, like, this was the 70s for me. So I was like, who did I have? I don't really remember.
My mother had Donny Osmond.
Yeah, there's somebody on Bad News Bears, I remember, that I don't know if you know what Bad News Bears is. But it was like it was a movie about kids that play kind of like The Sandlot, but before The Sandlot. Yeah. And there was some kid on there that I had a crush on. So yeah, that was my celebrity crush. All right, let me go ahead and share again, and we'll do another one.
Excuse me. I'm still getting over COVID. It doesn't want to leave me.
First favorite TV show.
And I already brought it up. That would be Sailor Moon. It actually premiered in America when I was like 2.5 years old. And I just like different cartoons, but I really like a lot of the stuff other kids did. So when my grandmother saw the ads for that, she's like, oh, I think she's going to like this. You know, these are like tough girls. And Yeah, she was right. Still absolutely obsessed. I actually just finished watching the 2 new movies that came out.
Oh, I didn't even know there's 2 new movies out. So
Yeah, they're doing Sailor Moon Crystal, and they just did the finale. The last 2 movies were the finale because the initial Sailor Moon show was not complete. They actually took things out of the original manga because they thought a Western audience wouldn't like them. Meaning
really,
it was too gay for the West, is actually what it was.
really,
So this is actually the proper storyline with the proper characters.
okay. There's no such thing as too gay in my mind, anyway. So yeah.
Of course not. Definitely not, no such thing.
So nowadays, like, what shows do you like to watch now? Other than Sailor Moon, obviously you still watch that, but what other are some of your favorite shows now?
I'm still rewatching Supernatural, not over the fact that I did 15 seasons was not enough. I'm getting into, I love Jujutsu Kaisen. I'm watching Spy Family right now, which I really enjoy. Demon Slayer. And I'm just starting Umbrella Academy. I'm only on season 2, but I read all the comics. But of course, this show is vastly different. But I'm enjoying that a lot. And I've started a bunch of different K-dramas. I'm currently doing Queen of Tears, which like I have to only watch maybe like 1 episode a week because Queen of Tears, yeah, you're gonna cry. You're gonna just cry at everything. I'm like, wow. But yeah, I'm getting into K-drama. Hotel Del Luna, that's another one that I absolutely adore. It's with the singer IU, and she's basically like the queen of death, and she runs a hotel where the deceased go before they're ready to pass on. And she winds up tricking a human into helping her run it, and he's just a scaredy cat and it's hysterical.
That's funny. That's funny. Okay, let's do one more. So let's see. Share screen. And obviously there's no right or wrong answers. This is just, whatever you remember.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. First dream job.
I think we've covered that one.
Yes. It could be one that obviously you wanted to be a writer. Have you ever had a job outside of writing that you really love that was like a dream job, or has it just always been just being a writer?
I mean, I do enjoy editing. That is something that I enjoy having as my career because my main career is editor. Writer is what I do on the side, kind of.
Right.
But I enjoy that. I was a tutor for a bit. I tutored children who were behind in their learning. One was a little girl with Down syndrome who I absolutely adored. I think that I would probably go back to that if I ever did. And one of the other things I did was dog walker. Otherwise, I went straight into querying and then proofreading. It's been most of my life in 2011. So 2011, I was 17 going on 18 when I started doing all of this stuff. So
that's really impressive because I think a lot of us kind of have come back and forth. Like for me, I wrote in my 20s a lot. I actually did more journalism though. I went to school for journalism and I was writing articles and things like that. Then I took a break for a while. Then I came back and I switched to fiction, but like I was never as committed to was able to do it full time. Even now I still work as a librarian. So, I'm not necessarily doing it full time. So I think that you have that unique story in that you had a focus, you were able to tap into it and then use it as a career as well.
Well, I am neurodivergent. I have kind of an issue with social cues and a lot of things. And one of the pluses of it is hyperfocus. And once I have my heart set on something, it's set. It's done. I'm going. And it also helped me having a mom who was very encouraging and who allowed me, she's like, I'm not going to, get rid of you at 18. Like, most parents like, okay, get out. You must get an education. You must live on your own. She's like, I'm not going to do that to you. I'm going to make sure that what you want, because you've been focused on this since you were 8, what you want, I am going to help you do. And it's all just a very unique situation. Also, me starting during the digital age, whereas getting published, during the time even before I was born, that's very difficult. Yeah. It's not the same thing. And most people really did have to have another job. I mean, I know now most of my clients write and also have a day job, just like I write and I'm also an editor.
Right.
But people can make full living off of being self-published right now, which I think is an amazing, amazing time. Everything being digital is not the best, but I think that because it makes being creative easier. You're not sitting there worrying about, did my manuscript that I mailed to them get there? How long is it going to take them to manually turn these pages, send it back to me? It's something that it's much more sure. You have more control over your career and your creativity now. Whereas before, that didn't happen.
Oh yeah, 100%. Things are a lot faster too, like the speed of things. Because I did start in the time when you were mailing manuscripts, and like that, mailing something, waiting for a reply could be months. Where now, like a lot of times, you could send something out and get a response back the same day. Like it's definitely changed the pacing of things and the ability to say, yeah, that's not working out for me. I'm going to try this instead. Where before you were sitting around for 6 months and finally you get a rejection, you'd be like, okay, I'm just going to.
And also, I think there's a wide variety of subgenres you can touch on now. That back then it just wasn't a thing because there wasn't the ability to know what readers really wanted.
Sure.
Readers were basically forced to take whatever the publishers gave them.
Oh, yeah.
They were the basic main genres, and that was kind of it. And then slowly but surely, even when I was like a kid, you see other ones come out now more and more. And it's really great. I think it kind of makes me happy that, again, that was where my dream and my job started, was during this era. I think
Yeah, for sure.
When I was born.
Yeah, and for the rest of us too, like we're also very happy that it came to this because it has changed even our scope of doing things.
Yes,
So
some of my clients are, from the time when they have, physical mailing and manuscripts and everything, and all they ever say is like, "This is just so different, but we love it." And it's like, yes, I'm glad that you're able to witness this and take part in it, because beforehand it was just too hard.
Yeah, it was a lot. Accessibility has definitely changed everything. Accessibility to editors, to book cover designers, etc. Yeah, it's always really awesome. It looks like we're out of time. So why don't you go ahead and let folks know again where they can find you and if you have any upcoming events.
At the moment, I don't have upcoming in-person events. I am looking at a few for 2025 and 2026. So hopefully I will have something for you guys. You can find me on social media, on Amazon as Luchesi. I am going to, in the comments here, put a link to my newsletter as well, where you can sign up for just one or all three of my pen names. I don't bombard your inbox, I promise.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
No. Well, we appreciate you coming on, and to our listeners, we really appreciate you tuning in. This has been a really fun show, and please give us a like. Share with people. Let us know we're out here, and remember, it's always time for Go Indie Now.